My
Yeah.
name is Ruth Greenwood. Hi, Amara.
How are you?
I'm good. So I guess I was just going to start out by telling you who I am and why I'm supporting independent maps. Um, you can probably hear already that I am not from Chicago. I grew up on the very far south side of the world in Sydney, Australia. Um, and I came over here to study in 2008, and I wanted to go down and volunteer with the campaign, with the Obama campaign, because it seemed really exciting. And I went to Virginia and was in a county where there were signs up on election day. I was doing voter protection because that was what I was a law student. That's what we could do.
Mhm.
So there were signs up, and they said, Republicans vote Tuesday, Democrats vote Wednesday. And so they were trying to suppress the vote, and it was in like a heavily black neighborhood. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Um, this is supposed to be the world's greatest democracy, and yet, that's not really a very democratic thing to do. Anyway, so that's how I got involved in voting rights. And then the more I've learned, the more I think that redistricting is a really big issue. Not having legislators or stopping legislators from drawing the lines that then they run in the districts from seems crazy to me. In Australia, we use a commission, an independent commission. In Canada, they do that. In England, they do that. And obviously now in California, they do that. So when I heard about the Illinois Commission, I decided it was a great idea to get on board. So that's me. Amara, do you want
Great.
to
So
tell me about you?
I sort of came about this whole issue in more of a roundabout way. I had been engaged in community organizing. So I live in the city of Chicago. I'm a West Sider. Spent most of my work here in the city, just organizing around issues that impact communities. So for me, the issue of redistricting was about representation and the quality of representation that people have, and how do we make sure that people are represented well by their elected officials. And so one of the things that stood out to me is when looking at how in the city of Chicago we have our wards, and this is sort of a micro level example of what redistricting can look like and some of the implications of it. So
Mm-hmm.
we have wards, 50 wards, and the maps are drawn, and typically they're drawn to preserve an incumbency, or they can be drawn to knock someone out. And
Mm-hmm.
so the best example that I can give is the second ward, which looks like, if you see it on a map, it looks like it makes absolutely no sense, right? And so what
Oh, this is
happened
a
is
new one.
that,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it was drawn in a way that drew the alderman out of the ward. And then it makes absolutely no sense. So the questions around what does it mean to have, what does redistricting mean? What are the implications of redistricting without input from people? And what happens when legislators are using it as a tool to preserve their position as opposed to making sure that residents, taxpayers, have the best representation possible? So that's sort of how I came around to it. A lot of my work in the community is about representation. And so how do we make sure that that is happening? That's always been the big question for me. So that was what I was interested in, and just learning about this particular campaign. And I was like, yeah, this is a huge issue.
Yeah, I agree. I actually realized I guess I should maybe also say what I do in my day job, because when you said a lot of what you do is in representation, I would love to know. So I run the Voting Rights Project here at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights.
Okay.
And so one of the things I focus on is redistricting, partly because I love maps. Actually, let me show you. I have maps everywhere. I have maps here. I have maps here. Wait, here. Anyway.
Really?
And so yeah, and so I have this mapping program, and when I look at the districts, I know the second district that you're talking about, because when I, being not from here, like when I was working in DC, I was working in New Hampshire, and when I came here, that one of the first things I do is I print out a list of all of the counties, and then I look where all of the districts are, and I sort of get a sense of, like, to me, usually districts should be representing communities. And so if you say, this is a district altogether, then I think, oh, that must be a community. I wonder what community that is, And so one of my favorite districts actually is at the congressional level. I really like the 4th district, which a lot of people complain about, right? So
Yeah.
it's the earmuff district. Actually, I should show you. I have a photo. My wedding cake had the 4th district on it, because my husband also does voting rights work.
Yeah.
Um,
It kind of looks like the second ward, the fourth district, in terms of because it's sort of not a crescent, but
yeah, it's like, here you go. This is me, Nick and Ruth. So this was my wedding cake. But a lot of people criticize that, right? But I actually think this shows you about communities. So the second ward is insane and doesn't actually combine any communities, because when I looked at it, I finally worked out that it's just splitting up a bunch of neighborhoods.
Right.
This district is actually got the Latino community on the north side and the Latino community on the south side and combined them up to be a district. Mm-hmm. And so now, Luis Gutierrez represents that district. That was actually a court-drawn district originally. Mm-hmm. So I reckon that's awesome. It's like, that's a community, that shows you a community, and that's, to me, how districts should be. But then, as you say, you look at the Chicago ward map, and it's just really hard to know who's connected to who or why or how, unless you put incumbents on the map, and then you know exactly why districts are drawn a certain way and not another.
Exactly. Yeah. And another thing that really sticks out to me is just, so I do a lot of economic development work and community development work, and one of the things that really sticks out with the redistricting is how much harder it makes to do cohesive economic development. And what ends up happening is, because the wards in Chicago are split up the way that they are, you can have a corridor where it's one ward on one side of the street and another ward on another side of the street. And now, because they're so, like, one community, for example, the Austin community has maybe 5 different aldermen that represent that ward. So getting things done is much harder because there's so many different individuals that we have to now cater to or seek out to get anything done. And then when you have those artificial boundaries that run north side of the street is one district or one ward, south side is another ward, it's hard to do anything that's cohesive and contiguous. So just from a practical standpoint, as an urban planner and community development, economic development professional, it actually makes it harder for us to do anything in those neighborhoods.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. I hadn't heard of it from the community economic development perspective. Mm-hmm. I do a bit of work with Asian Americans advancing justice, and so one of their big issues in the last redistricting, well, related to both the city wards and then state legislative districts, was that, Chinatown on the south side isn't big enough to be a district in itself, right. But it's exactly as you say, it's much easier for the community and frankly fairer if they have one person to go to, rather than saying, here are the 4 different people we need to get on side. And then also, if they're 4 different little 10% groups of a district, it means the legislator maybe has less of a feeling that they need to be responsive to the community.
Exactly.
If you put Austin in a district and that is the bulk of a district, and that's that is an economic community altogether, then the alderman or the state legislator is there to serve that group of people,
and that I think we haven't really touched on yet, but that's important, is that the people's awareness of who their representatives are. I mean, that becomes hard. I'm thinking about at the congressional level, the district that was recently changed was the first district. Mm-hmm. So people being able to keep up with who their representatives are is also an issue, because right now, if I ask people in the district, who's your congressman or who's your congresswoman, many of them wouldn't be able to tell. I have family members that live out in the suburbs, in the far west suburbs, southwest suburbs, and they just found out maybe a month ago that they're in the first district, which encompasses Inglewood, it encompasses large swaths of the south side. So now they just found out that it actually extends all the way 45 minutes south and west of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And that was just like a month ago. So it affects it affects a lot of things, because who do you go to when you have questions, when you have issues, when you want to lobby on a particular issue, when you're seeking information? Do you go to this congressman or that congressman? How many and so you can take that's the congressional level, but then take it down to the ward level. Yeah. Many people now in Chicago, they know the neighborhood they're in, but they couldn't tell you who their alderman is, because
that's totally true.
2 years ago we were on this side of the street and this was our alderman, and now they just redid the map, so now that's our alderman. And we even had an issue where an alderman refused to, I forget what happened, but it was like he refused to utilize any services for the new parts of the ward because he was mad that he wanted to be in the old ward. It was just really weird, and at the end of the day, it's the residents who end up losing out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think, with a lot of the districts that are drawn from Chicago out to the suburbs, in some places they are following a community and it makes sense. And in other places, it's just we had some people left and we needed to put them in a district, so we slapped them in there. Yeah, and then if you think about if you're the legislator, you're used to this core of a district and you sort of know your people, like you were saying, this guy's got his old district and he knows who he represents. And then there's just these random new people and, maybe there's no incentive to actually go and find out who these people are or what they're doing. If you know that next time you just say to the House leader, I want my district run this way, and that I think is not even a joke, right? I haven't seen the emails from Illinois. I don't think they've come out. But when I was working back in DC, I saw all the emails from Texas when they were drawing the congressional districts. And there's emails like, hey, my granddaughter's in this school. Can you make sure that's in my district? And, this company's headquarters need to be there because they're one of my biggest campaign contributors. And I was like, what the hell? How is that democracy? Like, they're just deciding who they want in their district.
And it's so blatant, too.
Yeah. And I've chatted to people who've been involved in Chicago ward districting in the past, and they say that the way to represent, if you have a community interest, they said you need to know what you're going up against. So you've got to find the alderman and work out what are the 5 to 10 things they want in their district, because inevitably there's some business that they want, there's some person, there's some bridge. You work out those things so then you don't propose a plan that crosses them, because you have to work within their system.
Exactly.
You're already on the back foot at that point. Right. If you have a commission, you go to the commission and you say, hey, we're Austin, we're a community, we want to be in a district together, this is where the lines go around our community. Then the commission goes, great, you guys think you're a community, we want to respect that, and then put you in a district. It's like,
right.
It's not rocket science.
Yeah, well, it all sounds so easy and simple. But just the way that it plays out, I think, I've always been wondering about I know why it plays out that way, but I think that's partly why the campaign is so important, because how do we make sure that we can manage the process in a way where the people don't lose out, where the people's voice is still present, and where it becomes about people, not about the actual elected officials. Because right now I feel like it's skewed toward what's in the interest of the elected officials to stay in their position, as opposed to what's in the best interest of representing people, getting people the best representation that frankly they deserve.
Yeah, and I think the idea that, some people say that, well, they're your elected representatives, they're going to do what you want when it comes to redistricting is crazy, because there are lots of things that you vote for somebody on, but usually when you're voting initially, it's not what's happening in 10 years in the redistricting cycle, or even in 2 years in the redistricting cycle. You're concerned about, what your taxes are, or whether your social services are, or where, schools. And so the idea that you're going to vote someone out because of the way they voted on a redistricting bill is kind of nuts. And then also because they know that, they can do whatever they want with the districts. They're like, well, I'm going to put, all these people that I know are going to vote for me in a district, and they're not going to vote me out because the only alternative is someone they hate. Yeah, it's crazy.
So how long have you been involved in Illinois? I know you said you
yeah. Yeah.
By way of Australia, then DC, then...
Yeah, then here. So I've been in Chicago nearly 3 years.
Okay.
So yeah, just still working in voting rights. Yeah, and so the stuff that I focus on with redistricting, I'm doing 2 main things. One of them is the reason I have a big picture of Wisconsin on my wall is because we're suing Wisconsin for partisan gerrymandering. So in Wisconsin, they don't have a ballot initiative process. So there's no way to get a redistricting commission unless they convince the legislators, who are entirely self-interested, to never have a commission, to actually change and have a commission. So we have worked to launch litigation there to try to set up a process where the courts will say there are limits on how extreme you can be. It won't actually necessarily mean that you will get people involved. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it will at least mean that you can't have an extreme partisan skew one way or the other. Right. But in Illinois, like in Michigan at the moment, there are ballot initiatives. And so that process brings it back, as you were saying, right, to the people. And so that's why I'm supporting that. Then the other work that I do on redistricting is, I have it here. I'm coming away. This is a report that we released in the last year called The Color of Representation. And we look at local level redistricting. So city, town, and village councils, county boards, and school boards. Because even though from the perspective of the Voting Rights Act, there are enough majority-minority districts in Illinois, if you just look at it purely mathematically, right? Not from the perspective of communities, which is a harder thing to litigate. But with the Voting Rights Act, you can litigate based on whether communities of color are being represented at all. And so in this report, we looked through, and there are, I was sort of shocked. We found 38 jurisdictions where either African American, Latino, Asian American, or combinations between those groups are big enough to elect one or more additional people to like their school board or to their state or to their city council, but they have never been given a district to do that. So, you know, one of the worst cases is like up in Zion in Lake County, there are 4 white commissioners, yet it's like 40% black population.
Right.
Crazy. Like anyway, so you know, looking at that is very more specifically about ensuring that people of color have representation. You know, whether it is descriptive representation, you know, whether people of color want to elect someone from their race or ethnicity, you know, is not necessarily here nor there. Although I think there is a big advantage to having diverse people in power.
Right.
But the idea is that people should be able to get together and elect someone who represents their interests.
Definitely.
And yeah, one of the reasons that we did that as well is because at the Lawyers Committee, we have a ton of different project areas. And usually, if there are issues in representation, there are tons of other problems. And that's exactly what we found. You know, you go in and you say, oh, this community looks like it has some problems. And then it suddenly turns out there's all these police brutality lawsuits. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, the schools are really segregated. Or one of them, like HUD, the Federal Housing Authority, was suing them over housing discrimination. I was just like, this is insane.
It's like similar to what happened in Ferguson. So, the issue that sort of sparked this peeling back the layers of what's actually going on was when Michael Brown was killed. Mm-hmm. So once that happened, then we began to look at, okay, well, what does representation in the police department look like? Then what does representation in the city government, the municipality look like? And that's when you found out that the Ferguson is it's predominantly African American, but all of the individuals, I think they had one African American alderman or person.
Yeah, but it's majority black, right?
Exactly. So then you start to ask the questions of, okay, well, who's representing whom? And it was only because of that event. Like if that had not happened, who knows how long it would have taken to peel back the layers to recognize that a lot of the policies that are developed are harming a large part of the population, but there are no representatives in that city or in that municipality or in that area who can push back and who can question what those policies are. So I guess it goes again back to, this is about how effectively we can be represented and how our interests are able to be represented, especially when it gets to city government, state government, and even nationally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the government has a lot of power, right? Like and it's not just at the federal level. So like for something like state level districting and then also local level, I mean, they have power over tons of services that affect you every day. Like even at the local level, it's like snow and trash removal. Inevitably, the cities we go into, particularly segregated cities, it's like, oh, snow and trash removal don't happen on the side, you know, where the African Americans are, and it does happen on the side where the white people are. Not everywhere, but you know, you see this again and again. And if you look at, you know, the Ferguson report, I hadn't even thought to look at parking tickets, right? Like, why would I assume that parking tickets would be discriminatorily applied? But having seen that, I was like, oh my God, it just never ends.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think someone was saying that when I talk about redistricting, I sound wonky and boring, and maybe I do. But but when you can relate it to so many other policy things, right? It's suddenly like, hey, this thing. Sure, might seem wonky, but if you can fix this, so many other things, you know, will flow from it.
Well, it's very applicable to people's day-to-day lives. I mean, we don't necessarily think in terms of redistricting, but we do know what it means when it feels like there's a disparate or inequitable either administration of services or disparate impact from certain policies. So, for example, in Chicago, the big thing was the red light cameras and the speed cameras. Yeah. An assessment of, well, where are most of those cameras located? Which are the ones that are generating the most money? And if you look in those areas, it was found that predominantly South Side and West Side neighborhoods that had the majority of the cameras and also were generating the most revenue for the city. Another thing that where people can connect it better is when you go to traffic court and you walk into the traffic court. And you would just imagine that the only people that are getting moving violations or tickets or what have you are Black and Latino people, because that's all you see when you go to traffic.
Yes.
You know that can't be the case, right? I mean, everybody has some moving violation or. You know.
Well, no. I mean, there's clearly, you know, no racial or ethnic difference or particularly a reason for a difference between who's doing moving violations.
Exactly. Yeah. So being able to connect that to where the policies are having that disparate impact that they might not have contemplated. But
Mm-hmm.
part of the reason that that contemplation might not have occurred is if we don't have people in those positions who are able to influence policy, who can say, hey, actually, this is how it's playing out in this area. Maybe we need to rethink how this policy is enforced, how it's implemented, and so on and so forth. But without the kind of representation that's close to the people, it has to be close to people.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's not, it just becomes very distant, and then there's a disconnect between what's being enacted and how it's affecting people.
Yeah, and I got to say, in some of the communities I've been looking at, there will be times when people will get together and be like, hey, there's something wrong here, and, you know, sort of start to put up a fight. But if they're not able to elect people that are going to respond to those concerns, you know, some of the ones I've been looking at were like 5, 10 years ago, and there's all this stuff up on YouTube, and they're really active, and then I've called them up and been like, hey, you know, you were really complaining about this 5 years ago. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you then, but we'd love to help you. And they're like, look, man, I tried, you know, I put 2 years in, I went to all the meetings, nothing ever changes, I just don't even care. And I was like, no, you know, there must be a way.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like, it's just tough when you're not seeing, you know, results.
Right.
But hopefully with this process of the petition gathering, that will mean that it is a broader process. So it's good to, you know, get change through the legislature, but actually going around and chatting to people, you know, I see people on the corner all the time, and I usually make them give me their spiel, because I love to hear like what all of the different signature collectors are saying.
Yeah.
And, you know, and ask them how it's going and whether they're getting signatures. Thankfully at the moment they're all very bright and bubbly. But, you know, I think it's a process to actually talk to the community about how redistricting affects what you do and how it could affect other policies. So
Right.
hopefully through this process, you know, in California, it ended up that they had their commission went through in 2008 and then 2010 for Congress. And so then in 2011 is when everyone was applying to be on the commission. They got 30,000 people who applied to be on their commission, you know, and that was like, there are a lot of people that are interested in this. This isn't just a couple of, you know, wonky people with a computer. I mean, they actually ended up on their commission with a guy who had run the Census Bureau, which I was like, I see why he applied, right? But then they also just had, you know, like moms and dads from, you know, Northern and Southern California who just thought it'd be interesting and cared about their community. So it was cool.
So can you talk a little bit more about the bipartisan nature of this effort? Because that's something that has come up. I know it's come up in conversations that I've had about the whole effort, and yeah, I think people really need to know that it is, or nonpartisan rather. Is bipartisan or nonpartisan?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I was tweeting out something about this last week, and I got retweeted by all of these Republican parties and lots of Tea parties, and I was like, this is a very strange experience for me. I worked for the Democrats when I was in DC, and I've like been on all the Obama campaigns, and I was saying this too. I have a friend who I refer to as my Republican friend, and I was like, look at this, people who are Republican think I'm cool. Anyway, so it's cool for me to be supporting something that I think is good for democracy, you know, and about bringing, people into the voting process. I think nationally, that's something that the Republican Party hasn't been good at. But here in Illinois, it's great. People are, you know, Republicans are behind it. And with respect to Democrats, I mean, I'm actually on the Independent Maps board. And so the board includes Christy Hefner, you know, who's a super lefty like me, Bill Daley, you know, and plenty of people who care about whether the maps are drawn fairly, rather than, you know, and I guess one of the things that when a lot of people say that maybe Democrats aren't supporting this, it's not Democrats that aren't supporting it, it is current Democratic legislators who aren't supporting it, because it affects their ability to hold power. Whereas Democrats, you know, people like me that are just in the city and, you know, or in the state, and you know, want to elect leaders that represent us, we are much more likely to get communities together in districts that will elect leaders. I mean, as long as Illinois is majority Democrat, you're going to get majority Democratic houses and senates. It's not, you know, it's not going to, in fact, it's not just that. I helped to write the amendment. And one of the things that I put in there, because I was worried, some people say that the political geography in Illinois is such that, you know, a lot of Democrats are packed into Chicago, and then the Republicans are spread out, and so that makes it easier to end up with a Republican gerrymander. And it's true, if you draw a bunch of like square districts around Illinois, sure, you can probably get a pretty extreme gerrymander. But when we draw districts, we never just draw boxes, right? You always have to respond to communities, whether that be through the Voting Rights Act, whether it's through communities that identify themselves, you know, through economic opportunities or other reasons. So we put in the amendment that the amendment can't be drawn to intentionally or unduly favor either side. So you can't draw a huge Republican gerrymander, you can't draw a huge Democratic gerrymander, and there are easy, well, not easy, but there are political science ways to test this. You throw the numbers into a spreadsheet and it tells you, is this going to turn out good or bad for your party? So
Right.
the aim would be that it turns out fair for everyone.
So what is used to define the fair standard? When you
Yeah.
so when you do it, you can track to see, at least to understand how, if it was drawn with the intentionality of creating the kind that you want, or if it was fair. But what do you use to determine what is that fair standard?
Sure, yeah. So, so there's intent side. So you can obviously look at, if people are intentionally saying, I really want to, affect one side or the other. But on the effect side, there's a few different political science metrics. One of the things that is really clear from political science is that, 80 to 90% of people very clearly identify with one party or the other. There are swing voters and there are people in the middle, but for most people, you can look at their voting records and you don't know their personal voting records, but everyone's in a precinct, right? And you can say that precinct voted X% this way or that way.
Right.
And you can use that to predict how elections will come out. And actually, it came out in one of the legal cases. Oh no, where did you go? Amara, are you there?
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You just went blank. I was like, don't leave. I know I'm being boring.
No,
Anyway.
I'm still here.
No, so in when the Democrats were drawing the maps last time, the metric came out that they were using, I think it was 1 times the Obama vote plus 2 times the Quinn vote, because they thought that the Obama vote was suggested too positive for the Democrats, whereas Quinn in his election, was a better metric. Anyway, there are various metrics you can use to see how people have voted and how the vote will come out. A good example of this is in Wisconsin, where we're suing. Again, we got all of the sort of documents and data for what in that case, the Republicans did, and they had a political scientist who predicted you would basically end up with like a 13%. I think he had 13.1% sway towards the Republicans, and then in 2012 it was like 13.2. Like he was within like 0.1 of getting it right. So I would say for worse, but I guess parties would say for better. You can really target districts these days to very much benefit, your side. Back when you had to draw districts on paper, it was a little bit tougher. But now, you can know so much data about someone. I mean, if you want to get really sophisticated, you can work out, which newspapers people read, or which online sites they go to, or what products they buy, and you can work out whether people are going to vote one way or another. And then you just draw a little line around all the people that you think are going to vote your way. But yeah, in terms of testing it out, the main metric so there's a metric called partisan bias, where you look at the 50% level, which side is more advantaged. And then there's another one that we're arguing in Wisconsin, which is basically you add up packing and cracking, right? So the best ways to advantage your side are either you pack, let's say blue and green people. You pack all the blue people into a district, so they're winning at 90-10.
Right.
Or you crack the blue people between districts, so they're losing 45-55. And so then you're basically wasting tons of votes. All of your votes are either going to, way too many to elect your person, or you're losing. So if you add all of that up over the whole state and just look at the difference, how many blue and how many green votes are being wasted, it's really easy to tell one side is wasting a lot more than the other. And that'll tell you how much one side versus the other is being treated. You can also then easily draw maps that ex ante, like before you even get there, you can know that it's going to treat both sides fairly.
So another question that I have that I've come across is understanding that. So we know that the district's population number is important, right? So having a certain number of people within a district. So something that's come up in conversations that I've had with people who are wondering why the process is what it is why not just draw contiguous districts? Why not just draw the district around a certain number of people, but keep communities as contiguous as possible, as opposed to doing all of the fancy things maneuverings that we tend to do when we currently draw the districts?
Yeah, so I mean, federal law says you have to have the districts be within like 5% either way of the ideal. So I forget what it is. It's about 57,000, I think, at the moment in each state legislative district. And so the reason you can't just draw like, you know, one county or one neighborhood is that they're all different sizes.
Right.
And so, I mean, I did this actually with a community group at the Chicago Ideas Week. We sat down and I said, let's try to draw a plan. I had my mapping software and I was like, I'll just click on the bits that you want to put in a district. And all the people said, well, we can't just do it looking at a map. We want to know, like, who's there? What do they want? Like, you know, because you click one box and then you're like, do I go to the right or do I go to the left to add a person on? And you need, you know, you have to have reasons to make those choices. So there's actually a litigator down in Texas who calls the people that want to draw square districts, she calls them the cubists. And she's like, you know, the cubists just want everything round, you know, round or square. But, like, there's so much more to that.
Right.
You know, as I was saying, like with the 4th Congressional District, it looks insane, except it actually does combine 2 communities really well.
Right.
At the same time, there are other districts which look insane, and they were drawn that way to, you know, draw someone out of their district. Have you seen the, actually, I have it here. Let me get this as well. Excuse me. Have you seen the little picture of when they tried to draw Barack Obama out of his house? When he was
I did not.
Okay, yeah, let me pull it up for you. So he was, I think he was running for Congress, and he got beaten by Bobby Rush, right? And so...
Right. He was running in the 1st district.
Yeah, right. And so before that, they knew that he was going to be potentially a very competitive candidate. Let me get this up. And so they didn't want him to be in one of the districts. They didn't want him to be in a particular district. And so here I am. Oh, I'm nearly there. Oh God, it's right at the front. There you go. So this shows you where they drew the line. They basically drew the district to go right around his house. And it's like, you can just see, it's like, you know, and so if you put on who your challenges might be, and then you're like, nope, I'm not going to include them.
Right.
Anyway, so you can see it's pretty easy to do. So what I was going to ask you more about the stuff that you do, because didn't you run for office?
I did. So I ran for mayor of the city of Chicago.
That's awesome.
So
I saw it because I read an article about you.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a busy last 18 months or so. Now, I didn't run into any districting issues, obviously, because it was citywide, so very clear boundaries. But it was just, for me, it was a good experience because I spent most of my time getting into the neighborhoods. And so a lot of my campaign was very grassroots. We had what we call the Unity Tour, where we pretty much went to all 77 community areas in Chicago. We hit all 50 wards. And then just having conversations with people, that was really the best education. As someone who has grown up in the area, has always loved the city and loved getting around the city, but then looking at it from the perspective of people who are having to make decisions about who their alderman is going to be, their representative, as well as who their mayor is going to be. And so really hearing people who didn't know who their alderman was. And we just went through that process, was it 4 years ago?
Yeah, right.
We drew the wards. And so there were so many people who they could tell you, yeah, I live in the Roseland community, but they didn't know who their alderman was. Or yeah, I live in Albany Park, but I'm not sure I was this person 4 years ago. Now I don't know who my alderman is. So that really brought home to me the importance of making sure that people's interests don't get trampled because of the interests of elected officials trying to preserve their position. So my experience running really, that was the educational part for me. It was actually really good and really eye-opening, and it's part of the reason why I think this process is so important and independent maps is so important. It's because it makes sure that people can have the kind of representation that they deserve.
And I guess have those conversations as well. Like, it sounds awesome that you went around to chat to everybody, right? It wasn't just, I know my people, you know, are in this community or that community. I'm just going to talk to them, and I don't care about the rest of the city, you know? And I imagine that's exactly what happens with districts as well. You know, you go to any campaign office, they have the district, right, that you draw up on the wall. And no doubt it's like, we know where we're hitting. We're going to hit our people, and we're going to get them out to vote. But the idea of actually chatting to everybody and saying, hey, I represent all of you. And I want to know what your issues are. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, we went all the way down to Hegewisch, which is on the far southeast side, to Saguenay, which is the far northwest side. You know, we went to literally and so I'm just the type of person, like, I love traveling anyway, and I love just walking through neighborhoods. So for years, like, I always I've been to pretty much every single, I've probably been to every corner of the city. So which helped when I was running because I knew, yeah, these are the areas that we really don't hit much. These are the areas that don't get a lot of attention. These are the areas where people don't engage the residents in this area very much.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was part of it was just really getting to see and understand the character of the city and recognizing how diverse the city is. So I understand perfectly well why the 4th Congressional District looks that way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I know La Vita and I know Humboldt Park, right? So it makes perfect sense. Now, to someone who doesn't know those dynamics of the community areas in Chicago, they'd be like, well, what the heck is that? In what universe does that make any sense?
Yeah.
But knowing how diverse the city and how the neighborhoods have formed, that to me is why I can understand it. But it also brings up the question about when demographic shifts take place, because there are a lot of changes that are happening in communities too. I mean, you can look on the Northwest side in the Logan Square community and how that community was primarily mainly a Latino community in years past, but we've seen it be shifting in the last 10 years, and that shift is actually accelerating. So what happens when we're starting to redraw the ward boundaries when the demographics of a community have changed?
Right.
20 years ago, if you looked at Division Street that goes into Humboldt Park and even going east toward the lake, it's not what it was. It's not what it is today. It was completely different. So how do changes in demographic and what we can anticipate about what the character of neighborhoods will be, what the demographic makeup of neighborhoods will be, how does that affect our ability to continue to put forth or create maps that accurately represent people? Because I can see a case where if, for example, a demographic is shrinking, so for example, if the Latino community was shrinking in the city of Chicago, and we know that we have 50 aldermen, but you don't want to go from 5 Latino aldermen to 1. You know, how does the map process, how does it play into that? I think that, to me, because I'm thinking about the future, how will this affect, the demographic shifts that are actually happening right now?
I think you're absolutely right. And when you were talking about all the places that you know, and you know Chicago inside out, I feel like I'm the exact opposite, right? I'm not from Chicago. I know bits of it. I'm getting to know it. But one of the things when, particularly when I go out to communities, as I said, I've been working with cities outside of Chicago. I feel like I am probably like half the legislators are. Like, I'm not from there. I look at the map, and like I remember specifically, I was chatting with some people in Joliet because they're doing a movement to try to get to move from at-large to district elections. And I said, oh, I can draw up some districts and, see, how it all works. And I saw a river, and I thought, oh, usually a river is like a dividing line. And so I drew a district on one side of the river. And then when I sat down with them, they were like, no, it's this highway over here that's a dividing line. The river's tiny, and actually this is like all the communities together. And I was like, I'm the guy who's, who sits down and says, well, how am I going to draw these districts for Chicago? I don't know Chicago, but I'll just draw it how it advantages me. You need to talk to people, and you need them to explain to you what their communities are. Right. And I know that in the last round, the Democrats, say, and they did do 60 hearings around the state, but they did that before they drew the map. And then they held 2 hearings for the whole state of Illinois and then passed the map. Whereas the California experience was they held 100 hearings, of which more than half were after they had drawn the first map. And that's exactly what a commission should do. You draw a map and you say, look, we listened to you, this is what we've put together. And then after that, there were, particularly in Los Angeles, which is a tough place to work out which community is where, the Korean community said, no, like you've put the lines in the wrong place, we need to be included on this side. And the Latino community explained, something else about the way they wanted a district to go. And so they mentioned that to the commission. The commission then redrew the lines. And in that case, they were actually sitting there in real time, like clicking on districts while people were making suggestions.
And that's the best way to do, because it's hard for people sometimes to conceptualize where they should be, what the map should look like. I mean, you can do anything theoretically before the maps have been drawn.
Exactly.
Who's to say how accurate it is? So actually going through the process and doing it sort of in real time is much more fair. It's transparent. And it ensures that it's more accurate than having us conceptualize where we think the map should be, and then you come up with something and we don't really get a chance to discuss it after the fact.
Yeah, right. And after the fact, all you can say is like, wow, that district really sucks. Well, I guess we've got that for 10 years,
Right. So my last question is, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years with this effort? I mean, how do you see this playing out, given the context in Illinois? I know we have the whole national issue, but at least just in Illinois, how do you think this will play out? What do you think is going to happen over the next few years with this effort?
This is so interesting. I was going to say I should ask you, but no. But I can give you, from the people that I work with, and then also having seen what happens in other states.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get on the ballot. Hopefully, right? We've got 304,000 signatures. We need 600,000. Hopefully, our 10 in 10 week will be effective, and we'll get 10,000 more. If we get the 600,000 signatures, we get on the ballot, and then it's a matter of chatting to people about what the amendment is and just putting it in place. Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I feel like, even whether you're for or against it at this stage, when it comes to people voting, you should be for people having as much information as possible. Mm-hmm. I don't want someone to just blindly vote yes or no. I want them to think about it and then go ahead and vote. I think, and it's not just the process of understanding what this is, but then also understanding, as we've talked about, how the redistricting affects lots of other issues that may be on the ballot, or maybe, there are other ways to get at the issues. But then hopefully it passes next year. And then we have a couple of years, right, which gives us a bit of an advantage over California, which had to turn everything around really quickly. I'm hoping that we'll have an online mapping thing. I've been chatting with friends like Google and Microsoft and, trying to convince one of those big companies to get into the nonprofit mapping world. But it would be cool if you can. I mean, one of the things I would love is if you can have something online and people can draw their own districts. You could see what districts people are drawing and putting communities together and saying, we think we're a community. So it'd be cool to have, discussion in the community, and then obviously 2020 is census year. And so that's another thing where all of the nonprofit groups that I work with always try to do a big push around census time to explain, particularly to communities that get worried about involving themselves with the government, so people maybe who are undocumented, or, even, people who, I don't know, are fined to the government or something, it's tough to understand how you giving your information to the government is not going to be some terrible thing for you.
Right.
So trying to do education and make sure that, people are really counted, so then we can get, federal dollars into Illinois. And then we'll have it play out. So I think it'd be really neat if it was, there are different states that are looking at this at the moment. It'd be fun to have people from California, and I've actually seen some of the commissioners talk about what happened there. I've seen one of the Arizona commissioners talk about what happened there. It'd be nice to have people come out and say, hey, this is what happened, this is how it went. You guys can do the same thing, or you can do it differently and, make it better. And how about you? How do you see it playing out? You're the political one. How do you see it playing out politically in Illinois?
Well, I am cautiously optimistic. I think that the environment right now is conducive to the kind of push that's being made. I think it's great timing having the ballot initiative going on right now, just because so much has happened politically over the last, I would say, 6 years. Mm-hmm. I think people are becoming increasingly conscious about wanting representation that really resonates with them. And so it's causing them to be more vigilant about the processes that take us there, the processes that get us that kind of representation. I think, if I can go back to, I'm thinking about 2011, I'm thinking about the elections a couple of years after that, I'm thinking about 2014, I'm thinking about the municipal cycle we just had this year, and I'm thinking about the upcoming 2016 election cycle, which corresponds with the presidential year, which is great for turnout. There's just a heightened awareness there. And so I think that I do think we're going to hit the goal of to get on the ballot initiative. So I feel pretty confident about that. But I'm really excited because I think people are just becoming more aware. And I think they're understanding a little bit better how important this is to the entire democratic process. And to me, that's absolutely critical. I mean, we came off of basically gutting the Voting Rights Act last year. Right? And I think that shook some people awake to say, well, a lot of the gains that we've been pushing for and voting access rolled back just like that. And we saw it last year after only 40 years after it was passed. It's already gutted, essentially. So I think it heightens the importance of this initiative, because all of this is about the democratic process. All of this is about democracy. All of this is about expanding not only participation, but the quality of representation that we believe should exist in a democracy. And I think more people are catching on to that and are aware of it. So I actually feel pretty good. I think we're going to make some pretty good gains in the next, I would say, next couple of years, in subsequent election cycles.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm a total optimist, and I love chatting with other people who are optimistic as well.
Yeah, well, sometimes it can be hard being optimistic.
Exactly.
But you gotta hang in there.
Exactly. Hang in there. Sadly, change doesn't happen fast, but it
Right.
does eventually happen. So hopefully we'll get there.
Definitely. This was fun.
Yeah, I agree. It's really fun to chat with you about this. Hopefully we'll continue to have these conversations with everyone we know.
I know, right?
Yeah.
We'll convince them with the optimism that'll pull them in.
Awesome. Okay.
All right, so I don't know if they're
I don't
gonna
know how we finish.